Jake Wheeler stared at the thermometer outside his kitchen window. Minus 45 degrees. The worst Montana winter storm in decades howled around his fortified cabin, rattling the reinforced windows despite their strength. Jake had built this place to withstand almost anything. Natural disasters, power outages, and even potential hostile encounters. The former military engineer valued his privacy, especially after 15 years of service that had left him with both skills and scars. He poured himself a mug of coffee and settled into his worn leather chair. The cabin's heating system hummed efficiently, keeping the bitter cold at bay. Outside, the wind screamed through the pine trees, bending them nearly horizontal. No one in their right mind would be out in this weather. That was fine with Jake. He preferred solitude. The security system's alert tone made him jump, spilling hot coffee on his hand. Someone was outside. That was impossible. The nearest town was 30 kilometers away, and no vehicles could navigate these roads in this storm. Jake wiped his hand and moved to his security console. The exterior cameras showed nothing but swirling snow. Then movement. A figure staggered through the drifts, falling to its knees before pushing up again. It approached his front door with painful slowness. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, increasing the camera's resolution. The figure reached his porch and collapsed against the door. Then came a sound that sent ice through Jake's veins. Knocking. Weak but desperate. "Please," a voice called, barely audible through the reinforced door. "I'm freezing. Let me in, I beg you." Jake zoomed the camera in further. The figure wore what looked like a thin jumpsuit, utterly inadequate for the deadly weather. No coat, no gloves, no proper boots. Suicide in these conditions. "Please," the voice called again. "I know you're in there. I need help." Jake reached for the cabin's intercom. "Who are you? How did you get here?" The figure looked up toward the camera. Jake's breath caught in his throat. Her face wasn't quite human. The skin had a faint bluish tinge with an iridescent quality to it. Her eyes were slightly too large, the structure of her face too delicate, too symmetrical. "My name is Ja," she said, her voice clearer now. "My vessel crashed 5 kilometers north of here. I cannot survive this temperature much longer." "Your vessel," Jake repeated, his military training kicking in. "What kind of vessel?" "Please," she said, her strangely beautiful face contorting with pain. "I'm dying in this cold. I can explain everything inside. I'll reward you with knowledge and technology beyond your imagination." Jake's hand hovered over the door controls. Earth had experienced first contact 30 years ago, and the results had been mixed. Some alien species had shared technologies, while others had clear hostile intent. Most humans had never seen an actual alien in person. Contact was carefully managed by international agencies. "How do I know you're not a threat?" Jake asked. "Scan me," she replied, her voice weakening. "I carry no weapons. I'm alone and injured. Please, human. Your cold is poisonous to my kind. Few minutes more, and I die." Jake activated the cabin's security scanner. The readout showed no weapons, though it detected an unusual device on her wrist and some unidentifiable materials in a pouch at her waist. Her body temperature was dropping rapidly. Against his better judgment, Jake made a decision. He activated the small containment room adjacent to the main entrance, a secure space he had built for emergencies that could be sealed off from the rest of the cabin. "I'm opening the outer door to a secure room," he announced through the intercom. "You can warm up there. Try anything suspicious, and I'll drop the temperature back to what it is outside." "Thank you," she whispered. The outer door slid open. Just stumbled inside, collapsing onto the floor as the door sealed behind her. Jake watched through the internal cameras as she curled into a fetal position, her body shaking violently. Jake increased the room's temperature to 80 degrees. Slowly, Jia's shivering subsided. After several minutes, she managed to sit up, looking directly at the camera. "The Taiyang Collective thanks you for your mercy," she said formally. "The what?" Jake asked through the intercom. My people, we have been observing Earth for many years. Why are you here? Why now? And why crash in the middle of nowhere during the worst storm in decades? Jia's strange eyes blinked slowly. The storm is why I'm here, but that explanation requires more time. She looked around the small room. May I have water? Our biologies are similar enough that it would help me recover. Jake considered this, then sent a bottle of water through the small transfer drawer built into the wall. Jia drank it gratefully. My scout vessel was damaged as I entered your atmosphere, she explained. I was forced to make an emergency landing. Your dwelling was the only heat signature my systems detected before they failed. Convenient, Jake said skeptically. Necessary, she corrected. My species evolved on a world without winters. Temperatures below your 0 degrees are fatal to us if extended. I would have died out there. Jake studied her through the camera. Despite her alien features, her expression seemed genuinely pained, relieved, and now increasingly anxious. What's this reward you mentioned? He asked. My people possess technologies your scientists have only theorized about. Energy generation, medical advances, material science beyond your current capabilities. And you're authorized to just hand these over. Jia hesitated. The situation is complex. I was sent to make contact, but not quite like this. Jake sensed she wasn't telling him everything. Years of military interrogations had taught him to recognize evasion. Get some rest, he said finally. We'll talk more when you've recovered. Thank you, she said, genuine gratitude in her voice. Few would show kindness to a stranger so different. As she curled up on the small cot in the corner, Jake checked his weapons and reinforced the cabin's security systems. The storm outside intensified, howling with unnatural fury. He couldn't shake the feeling that her arrival and this historic storm were connected somehow. Whatever brought this alien woman to his doorstep, one thing was certain: his isolated life had just become infinitely more complicated. Jake spent the night watching Jia through his security monitors. The alien woman slept fitfully in the containment room, occasionally shivering despite the warm temperature. Her bluish skin seemed to shimmer slightly even in the dim light, like mother-of-pearl catching the sun. He'd seen aliens on newscasts before, but never in person. Never in his home. Morning came with no break in the storm. If anything, the blizzard had intensified. The temperature outside had dropped another 10 degrees, and the wind howled with an almost unnatural persistence. Jake prepared 2 mugs of coffee and sent one through to Jia via the transfer drawer. She sniffed it curiously before taking a small sip. This is pleasant, she said, looking directly at the camera. Bitter but stimulating. It's just coffee, Jake replied through the intercom. Nothing special. Among my people, sharing food or drink is a sign of trust, Jia said. I appreciate the gesture. Jake frowned. He hadn't meant it as any kind of gesture. How are you feeling? Better. Your atmosphere is still uncomfortable, but no longer lethal. She stretched her slender arms above her head. May I ask how long you plan to keep me in this room? Until I'm sure you're not a threat. Jia nodded as if this were perfectly reasonable. The Taiyang have studied humans for decades. Your caution is expected. Your species has survived by being suspicious of the unknown. And yours hasn't. We evolved differently. Our world had fewer predators, more resources. Cooperation became our primary survival strategy rather than competition. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her through the monitor. So, why are you really here, Jia? The truth this time. The alien woman set down her coffee mug. The truth is complex. I was indeed sent to make contact, but not randomly. You were selected. This caught Jake off guard. Me? Why? Your military background, your engineering skills, your isolation. She counted the reasons on her long, 6-fingered hands. You were identified as someone who might both believe what I have to tell you and have the capabilities to help. Jake's muscles tensed. Help with what exactly? May I show you something first? Jia reached for the small pouch at her waist. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward his sidearm. Slowly, he warned. She carefully removed what looked like a smooth stone from her pouch. When she pressed her thumb against it, the stone projected a three-dimensional image into the air, a visual of Earth from orbit, with strange energy patterns swirling around it. "This is your planet as it appeared 3 of your weeks ago," she explained. "And this." The image shifted to show the same view, but with intense cold-colored patterns concentrated over North America. "This is now." Jake stared at the projection. "What am I looking at?" "Weather manipulation technology," Gia said grimly. "This storm is not natural." Jake laughed despite himself. "You're saying someone's controlling the weather?" "That's beyond your current technology, yes," Gia interrupted, "but not beyond others." She changed the image again, showing a sleek vessel unlike any spacecraft Jake had seen before. The Kyo, a species that transforms planets to suit their biology before colonization. They prefer extreme cold. Jake fell silent, processing this information. It sounded absurd, and yet, the storm outside did feel wrong somehow. Too persistent, too focused. "So you crashed while, what, investigating this weather control tech?" Gia nodded. "My vessel was designed for stealth, but they detected me and fired upon my ship as I entered your atmosphere. I managed to crash land rather than being destroyed outright. And you just happened to crash near my cabin." "Not chance. I aimed for your location specifically." She looked directly at the camera. "As I said, you were selected. We've been monitoring potential human allies." Jake ran a hand through his hair, unsure what to believe. "Let's say I buy this story. What exactly do you want from me?" "First, shelter until the storm abates enough for my people to retrieve me. Second," she hesitated, "I need your help building a device that can disrupt the Kyo's weather technology. Their full invasion force will arrive within days if we cannot stop their terraforming process." "Why should I trust you?" Jake asked bluntly. "You shouldn't," Gia replied with unexpected candor. "Trust must be earned. But perhaps we could start with a gesture of good faith." She reached again into her pouch and removed a small cylindrical object. "Your power systems are impressive for your technology level, but they're straining against this cold. This will stabilize and enhance your energy output." She placed the device in the transfer drawer. Jake examined it carefully after it came through. It was like no technology he had ever seen, with components that seemed to shift slightly under his gaze. "How does it work?" The engineer in him couldn't help asking. "Insert it into your main power conduit. It recaptures energy that your systems waste as heat." Jake weighed his options. If she wanted to harm him, giving him unknown alien tech was a strange way to go about it. After careful consideration, he took the device to his power room and installed it according to her instructions. The effect was immediate. The lights brightened, the heating system's strain reduced, and his monitors showed a 40% increase in efficiency. When he returned to the security room, Jia was waiting patiently. "I've decided you can leave the containment area," Jake said finally. "But you'll wear this." He sent through a tracking bracelet he'd used during military operations. "Try anything hostile, and it'll deliver enough voltage to incapacitate you." Gia examined the bracelet before slipping it onto her wrist. "Reasonable precautions. Thank you for your partial trust, Jake Wheeler." As the door between the containment room and the main cabin slid open, Jake stood with his hand near his weapon. Gia stepped through cautiously, her large eyes taking in her new surroundings. "Your dwelling is well constructed," she noted. "Defensible. Self-sufficient. That was the idea." Outside, the wind screamed with renewed fury, rattling the windows. Both human and alien turned to look at the visual display of the storm's increasing intensity. "We don't have much time," Gia said quietly. "The Kyo are accelerating their terraforming. Soon, even your fortified home won't keep out the cold they're creating." Jake watched Gia examine his collection of engineering tools and spare parts with obvious interest. 3 days had passed since he'd allowed her out of the containment room. The storm outside had grown worse, with temperatures plummeting to -60, far below any natural winter pattern he'd ever experienced. "Your hand tools are surprisingly similar to early Taiyan designs," Jia observed, running her six-fingered hand over a set of precision screwdrivers. "They do the job," Jake replied, still maintaining a careful distance. Despite her apparent helpfulness, he kept his sidearm within reach at all times. "We should begin work on the disruption device soon," Jia said, her large eyes turning toward the window. The glass had developed frost on the inside, despite the cabin's heating system running at maximum capacity. "The Kyo's terraforming is progressing faster than I anticipated." Jake crossed his arms. "Before we start building anything, I need the full truth. No more partial explanations or convenient omissions." Jia set down the tools she'd been examining and nodded slowly. "That's fair." She gestured to the kitchen table. "Perhaps we should sit." Once seated across from each other, Jia placed her communication stone on the table between them. The holographic display activated, showing a star map. "The Taiyang Collective spans these 12 systems," she explained, indicating a cluster of blue stars. "The Kyo Empire controls these 27. A larger section of red stars appeared, separated from the blue by a buffer zone of neutral systems. We've been at war for over 70 of your years. A cold war, mostly, limited engagements, proxy conflicts, technological sabotage. The Kyo cannot tolerate our worlds. Too warm, too bright. We cannot survive theirs. Too cold, too dark." "And Earth?" Jake prompted. "Earth sits in what you might call a Goldilocks position, temperate enough for both species to adapt to with moderate discomfort." The hologram shifted to show their solar system. "But the Kyo don't adapt. They transform." The image zoomed in on Earth, showing the strange energy patterns Jake had seen before, now covering much more of the northern hemisphere. "The Kyo seed a planet's atmosphere with self-replicating nanomachines that systematically alter climate patterns," Jia continued. "First come the storms, then persistent cooling, and finally a permanent winter state. The process normally takes years, but they've developed an accelerated version. Why warn us? Why not your own leaders?" Jia's expression darkened. "I did warn them. The collective council decided Earth was too primitive to be worth the risk of open conflict with the Kyo." She looked down at her hands. "I disagreed with their assessment." "So you came anyway," Jake said, beginning to understand. "Against orders." "Yes. My scout ship was private, not military. When the collective detected my launch, they alerted the Kyo, hoping to prevent an escalation." Jake stood up abruptly. "Your own people told the enemy you were coming. They set you up." "They made a strategic decision," Jia said quietly. "The needs of billions over the lives of one scout and one developing world." Jake paced around the kitchen, processing this revelation. "So you're what? A rogue agent? A defector?" "I am considered a provocateur now," she admitted. "But I couldn't stand by watching another world die. We've seen what happens after Kyo terraforming. No indigenous life survives." The hologram shifted again, showing a planet that looked like a frozen wasteland. This was Vela, a world much like Earth. Oceans, forests, diverse life forms. Now it's a Kyo colony world, temperatures averaging -90 degrees, inhabited only by them, and their engineered servant species. Jake stared at the image, then at the window where the unnatural blizzard raged outside. Suddenly, the extreme cold made terrible sense. "How long do we have?" "At the current acceleration rate, most of your northern hemisphere will be uninhabitable within 2 weeks. Global ecosystem collapse will follow within 3 months. And no one on Earth knows," Jake said, the enormity of the situation sinking in. "Our governments think this is just extreme weather. The Kyo are careful. They make the changes appear natural. Heightened solar activity, causing polar disturbances, shifting jet streams. Your scientists can explain each individual phenomenon. just not why they're all happening simultaneously. Jake picked up his satellite phone, then set it down again with frustration. Communications are still down. Even if they weren't, who would believe me? A reclusive ex-military engineer claiming alien weather manipulation. That's why I came to you specifically, Gia said. You don't need to convince anyone. You have the skills to help me build a disruption device that can target the nanomachines directly. And if I refuse? Gia's large eyes blinked slowly. Then I will try alone and fail. The KO ships in orbit will detect any significant energy signature I create. They'll eliminate me, and Earth's transformation will continue unabated. Jake ran his hands through his hair, thinking hard. What about your people? Won't they notice you went missing? Eventually. But they'll assume the KO destroyed me, which was the expected outcome when they exposed my mission. Her voice held no bitterness, just a calm acceptance. By the time they investigate, it will be too late for Earth. Outside, the wind howled with new ferocity, as if responding to their conversation. The cabin creaked under the strain. My thermal sensors detect dropping temperatures throughout your structure, Gia observed, her voice concerned. Your northern wall is approaching freezing point internally. Jake checked his environmental controls. The readings were alarming. Despite the enhanced power system, the heating couldn't keep up with the intensifying cold. This disruption device, he said finally. How do we build it? What do you need? Relief visibly washed over Gia's features. Most of what we need, you already have. Your military background served you well in preparing this place. She reached into her jumpsuit and pulled out a small crystal-like object. This is the core component, a quantum oscillator. It can detect and match the frequency of the KO nanomachines. And then what? We just turn them off. Better, Gia said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. We reprogram them. Instead of creating cold, they'll begin dismantling themselves. The KO will detect the failure, but by then it will have spread throughout the nanomachine network. Jake made his decision. Let's get started. As they began gathering components, a new sound cut through the howling wind, a deep, resonant tone that seemed to vibrate through the very ground beneath them. What's that? Jake asked, freezing in place. Gia's face paled to a lighter blue. KO landing craft entering the atmosphere. They're coming to check on their terraforming progress. She looked at Jake with urgency. We've just run out of time. Jake's hands worked quickly, connecting the modified circuit boards to Gia's quantum oscillator. The alien technology seemed to adapt to his human components in ways that defied his engineering knowledge. They had converted his workshop table into an improvised lab, tools and parts scattered across the surface. Pass me the copper wire, Jake said, not looking up from his work. The vibrations from the KO landing craft had stopped an hour ago, but that only increased his anxiety. They were out there somewhere in the blizzard. Gia handed him the spool of wire, her six-fingered hand brushing against his briefly. Despite the cabin's heating system working overtime, her skin felt cool to the touch. Your technology is primitive but remarkably adaptable, she observed, watching him splice the wire into the device. The Taiyang Council underestimated human ingenuity. We make do with what we have, Jake replied, focusing on the delicate connection. Always have. The disruption device was taking shape, a strange hybrid of human and alien technology. At its center sat Gia's crystal oscillator, now surrounded by a web of circuits, amplifiers, and power converters Jake had salvaged from various equipment around his cabin. Will it work? He asked, voicing the doubt that had been growing as they worked. In theory, Gia admitted. No one has attempted to reverse KO terraforming technology before. The principle is sound. But we're making this up as we go, Jake finished for her. Great. A sudden alert from his security system interrupted them. Jake quickly moved to the monitor. The external cameras, struggling to function in the extreme cold, showed dark shapes moving through the snow about half a kilometer from the cabin. KO scouts, Gia whispered, looking over his shoulder. Their environmental suits allow them to withstand temperatures that would normally be too warm for their biology. On the screen, the figures moved with strange, fluid motions. They were tall and thin, their suits giving them an insect-like appearance. One carried a device that it repeatedly pointed in different directions. They're scanning for heat signatures and technology signals, Gia explained. Your cabin's insulation has protected us so far, but they're moving in a search pattern. They'll find us eventually. Jake checked the readings from his external sensors. Minus 78 degrees out there now. How is that even possible? The weather service said this system couldn't drop below minus 40. The nanomachines create cascading effects. Each decrease in temperature allows them to work more efficiently, which further decreases the temperature. Gia pointed to the dark shapes on the screen. But even the Kyo can't survive exposure to temperatures below minus 100 without their technology. That's our advantage. Jake raised an eyebrow. How is that an advantage? We can't survive out there at all. We don't need to. Gia gestured to their half-finished device. If we can complete this and activate it, the nanomachines will begin reversing their effects. The sudden temperature change will overcome their suit's capabilities. Jake nodded slowly, understanding her plan. But we need more time. And we need to boost the signal strength if we want to affect nanomachines across a wider area. He looked around his workshop, eyes landing on the satellite communication array he'd modified years ago. That might work. If we connect our device to my communication system, we could use the dish to broadcast the signal. Gia's eyes widened. That would increase the range exponentially, but it would also alert the Kyo to our exact location immediately. No choice, Jake said grimly. We'll have one shot at this. They worked frantically for the next 2 hours, Jake dismantling his communication system and integrating it with their device, while Gia programmed the quantum oscillator to generate the precise frequency needed to reprogram the nanomachines. The security alert sounded again. The Kyo scouts had changed direction and were now moving directly toward the cabin. They've detected us, Jake said, checking the monitor. We have maybe 30 minutes before they reach us. Gia worked faster, her fingers moving with incredible precision across the control interface she'd created. The programming is complete, but the integration with your broadcast system is still unstable. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead, despite the growing cold inside the cabin. The heating system was failing as temperatures outside continued to drop. Frost now covered the inner walls completely. We need more power, he muttered, looking at the readings. The broadcast will drain everything we have in seconds. An idea struck him. He moved quickly to a locked cabinet in the corner of his workshop and pulled out a small metal case. Inside was a military-grade portable fusion cell, technically illegal for civilian possession, but Jake had kept it from his last mission. Will this work? He asked, showing it to Gia. Her eyes widened. That contains enough energy to power the entire device for several minutes. More than enough time. Jake connected the fusion cell to their creation, carefully integrating it into the power system. As he worked, a loud crack echoed through the cabin. One of the outer windows had shattered under the extreme temperature differential. We're out of time, Jake said, sealing the last connection. The cabin's structural integrity is failing. Gia looked up from her work, her face showing both fear and determination. It's ready. But Jake, there's something I haven't told you. Now, really. The energy discharge will be significant. This room will likely be destroyed in the process. She hesitated. And I don't know if your human physiology can withstand the quantum field it will generate. Jake laughed despite himself. So it might kill us. Perfect. I'm sorry, she said simply. I should have told you sooner. Jake checked the monitor one last time. The Kyo scouts were less than 5 minutes away. More windows were cracking, and the cabin's temperature was dropping rapidly. No other options, he said, moving to the activation switch they'd installed. For what it's worth, I'm glad you knocked on my door, Gia. She placed her hand over his on the switch. The Taiyang chose well when they selected you, Jake Wheeler. Outside, the unnatural storm reached new levels of fury, as if the Kyo technology sensed what they were attempting. The cabin groaned under the assault of wind and cold. On three, Jake said, his eyes meeting Jia's strangely beautiful alien ones. 1, 2. A tremendous crash interrupted them as the workshop door burst inward, snow and bitter cold flooding the room. In the doorway stood 2 Kyo scouts, their insect-like environmental suits gleaming with frost, weapons raised. 3. Jake shouted, slamming down the switch. The device hummed to life, emitting a pulsing blue glow that rapidly expanded to fill the room. The quantum oscillator at its heart began spinning faster and faster, releasing waves of energy that seemed to distort the very air around them. The Kyo scouts fired, but their weapons' energy dispersed harmlessly in the quantum field. Jake pulled Jia down behind the workbench as the device's glow intensified to blinding brilliance. And then, with a sound like thunder, the disruption signal broadcast outward in all directions. The quantum pulse rippled outward in expanding waves, bathing everything in eerie blue light. Jake and Jia huddled behind the workbench as the Kyo scouts stumbled backward, their environmental suits sparking and failing. The temperature in the workshop stopped dropping. "It's working," Jia whispered, her large eyes reflecting the pulsing light. "The Nanomachines are reversing their programming." Outside, the howling wind began to change pitch, the unnatural storm losing coherence as the terraforming technology turned against itself. The Kyo scouts' movements became erratic, their insect-like forms twitching as their suits failed to compensate for the rapidly warming air. Jake peeked over the workbench. "They're vulnerable." He grabbed his hunting rifle and took careful aim. The first shot struck the lead Kyo's suit precisely where Jia had indicated its life support system would be. The alien collapsed in a heap. The second Kyo fired wildly, energy bolts scorching the ceiling, before Jake's second shot found its mark. "We need to get outside," Jia said urgently. "The device is creating a feedback loop with the cabin's power systems." Smoke poured from the fusion cell as it overloaded. Jake grabbed his emergency pack and cold weather gear, tossing Jia his spare thermal suit. They sprinted for the exit as electrical systems throughout the cabin began to fail. The moment they stepped outside, Jake gasped. The air was still bitterly cold, but the wind had died completely. Above them, the clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of clear night sky. Most astonishing were the streamers of blue-green energy rising from the snow in spiraling columns, like reverse lightning reaching toward the stars. "The Nanomachines are self-destructing," Jia explained, her voice filled with wonder. "They're converting back to raw energy." A deep rumble shook the ground. Jia pointed upward as dark shapes became visible through the dissolving cloud cover. "Kyo ships. They've detected the disruption." Jake pulled her toward the tree line. "We need cover." They had barely reached the forest when his cabin erupted in a blinding flash, the overloaded power systems finally giving way. The shock wave knocked them both off their feet. "Your device was more effective than I anticipated," Jia said, helping Jake up. "The quantum field has expanded to cover several kilometers already." Above them, the Kyo vessels moved in formation, their sleek black hulls reflecting the strange energies rising from below. Suddenly, one ship veered sharply, its engines flaring erratically. "The disruption field is affecting their technology too," Jia said. "Their ships use similar principles to the terraforming nanomachines." Jake watched as the affected ship spiraled downward, crashing into the mountainside several kilometers away in a spectacular explosion. The remaining vessels began to retreat, climbing rapidly toward orbit. "They're running," Jake said in disbelief. "Temporarily," Jia cautioned. "They'll adapt their technology and return with greater force." She pulled a small device from her pocket. "I need to contact my people. With evidence of direct Kyo aggression against a developing world, the Collective Council cannot ignore this situation any longer." Jake's satellite phone, miraculously still functioning, beeped with an incoming signal. Communications were being restored as the artificial storm dissipated. For hours, they watched the sky as the atmospheric disturbances cleared. The temperature, while still cold, had risen to a natural winter level. By dawn, patches of blue sky were visible, and the snow had stopped entirely. Jiz's communicator suddenly activated, projecting a small hologram of a stern-faced Taiyang male. "Scout Jia," he said formally, "your unauthorized mission has created a diplomatic crisis." "Commander Hoon," she replied without apology. "The Kyo violated our treaty by targeting a protected developing world. I have evidence of their terraforming technology and direct attacks against indigenous life." The commander's expression remained severe, but his next words surprised Jake. "The Council has reconvened based on your initial transmissions. A defensive fleet has been dispatched to Earth's orbit. They will arrive within 6 hours." Relief washed over Jiz's features. "Thank you, Commander." "Do not thank me," he replied sharply. "Your actions, while ultimately justified, have initiated the first direct conflict with the Kyo in 30 years. There will be consequences." The hologram flickered out. Jia turned to Jake, her expression complex. "Your world will be protected now," she said. "The Taiyang fleet will neutralize any remaining Kyo forces in your system." Jake gazed at the clearing sky. "What happens next?" "Your people make official first contact with Earth governments." "Yes, this incident has forced the Council's hand. They can no longer dismiss humanity as too primitive to join interstellar affairs." She looked at the ruins of Jake's cabin. "I am sorry about your home." Jake shrugged. "Small price to pay." The sound of helicopters reached them from the south, human military forces finally able to navigate with the storm's end. Jake's phone rang with a government emergency alert, instructing all civilians to stay indoors due to severe weather anomalies and potential security threats. "They don't know what to make of all this," he said, showing Jia the message. "Mysterious storms, crashed alien ships, energy phenomena. Earth is about to have a very interesting day." "And you?" Jia asked. "What will you tell them when they find you?" Jake considered this as the helicopters drew closer. "The truth, or at least as much as they're ready to hear." Jia touched his arm gently. "The Taiyang Council will request your presence when they arrive. You're the first human to assist us directly. That makes you a valuable cultural intermediary." "Ambassador Wheeler," he said with a wry smile, "has a strange ring to it." The first helicopter appeared over the ridge, searchlights sweeping the area. As it spotted them and banked toward their position, a new light appeared in the sky, a brilliant flash that quickly resolved into descending vessels unlike anything human-made. "My people arrive," Jia said as the elegant Taiyang ships broke through the clouds. Unlike the dark Kyo vessels, these gleamed with iridescent colors similar to Ji's skin. As both human and alien craft converged on their position, Jake and Jia stood side by side in the clearing. The snow around them continued to melt under the effects of their device, revealing patches of earth that had been buried for weeks. "You know," Jake said, watching this pivotal moment in human history unfold, "when you knocked on my door begging to be let in from the cold, this isn't exactly what I expected." Jia's laugh was musical. "The universe rarely meets our expectations, Jake Wheeler, but sometimes it exceeds them." Around them, the last of the unnatural winter receded, and with it, humanity's isolation in the cosmos.